Imagine having a shield so strong that your wealth remains untouchable by lawsuits, creditors, or unexpected financial challenges. For those who know the secret, an irrevocable trust can offer precisely that level of protection. But what exactly is an irrevocable trust? I've set up thousands of them. So how can it secure your financial future? In this guide, we'll unravel the mystery, break down the advantages, and show you how these powerful legal tools work. Whether you're looking to safeguard your family's legacy or fortify your assets against unforeseen threats, understanding irrevocable trust could be the financial game changer that you've been searching for. So let's dive in and discover if this is the key to your peace of mind and financial freedom. Here's what we'll go over together today. Key terms used so that you understand what we're talking about. What is an irrevocable trust so you know what it does? The basics of setting up an irrevocable trust so you know how to do it. Common benefits of irrevocable trusts so you know what good it'll do once you get one. Typical uses for irrevocable trusts. Well, you'll learn some of the ideas you may not have thought of, including possibly slashing your tax bill and probate fees. We'll also talk about revocable versus irrevocable trusts, so you'll know the true differences. We'll talk about why irrevocable trusts work best for asset protection. Irrevocable trusts aren't necessarily unchangeable, so you actually may be able to make some changes. And which works better, domestic trusts versus offshore trust, to protect your assets from lawsuits, so when some big ugly guy puts a lawsuit in your hands, you'll know what to do. Okay, key terms used. Before getting into the fine details of irrevocable trusts, you need to know a few terms, including beneficiary. The beneficiary is any party who can benefit from the trust's assets, whether it be the trust creator's family members, a charity, a business, or even the trust creator themselves. Beneficiaries typically receive trust distributions in set intervals as determined by the trustee or grantor, though trust benefits come in many different forms. Grantor or settlor. The grantor, also known as the settlor, is the person who created and funded the trust. And during the trust creation process, they deposit assets into the trust, and they cede control over those assets to the trust itself and the trustee. Next is the trustee. The trustee is a person or entity in charge of managing the trust. They are to follow the terms of the trust that determine when to distribute benefits to the listed beneficiaries. Now, trustees, as clarified in the trust document, also legally hold the trust assets, which protects those assets when the settlor is sued or pursued by creditors. Now, the biggest question I get is this: what if the trustee runs off with my money? Now, keep in mind, it is a very highly regulated industry. The government audits the trustees regularly, and they do thorough background checks before issuing trustee licenses. In the 34 years I've been in this business, I've never heard of an offshore trustee running off with somebody's money. Now, I've heard of, but never experienced, a trustee running off with somebody's money, and that was a trustee in the U.S., in Chicago, Illinois, and the trustee, by the way, was caught and the money was returned. So what is an irrevocable trust? An irrevocable trust is a type of trust that cannot be easily revoked or altered once it's set up. Establishing such a trust requires the settlor to relinquish significant control over the assets to the trustee. While this might initially seem like a drawback, it's actually a powerful advantage. By legally distancing the settlor from the assets, the trust makes it far more challenging for creditors to lay claim to them. Now consider this: if you, as the settlor, retained direct control over the trust's assets, a court could compel you, make you, use that control to satisfy a legal judgment. In other words, retaining control could ultimately leave you defenseless, as it effectively places the power into the hands of the court. In contrast, a trustee serves as a crucial buffer, protecting your assets and ensuring they remain out of the reach of legal adversaries. And I can tell you by my experience, this is even more powerful if it is an offshore asset protection trust, which we'll cover in a bit, because your local courts do not have jurisdiction over our law firm who serves as our trustee offshore. Now, here's some of the basics of setting up an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable trusts require three parties, as we said, the settlor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. When forming a trust, the settlor grants assets into the trust, though the grantor does not retain direct control of deposited assets. They can set usage conditions for those assets beforehand. The grantor establishes the trust assets' original rules, terms, and intended uses. Now, both the trustee and the beneficiary must abide by the grantor's wishes. For example, a grantor may specify that the money placed in an irrevocable trust should only be used for specific purposes, such as for college tuition or for wedding expenses. And by the way, while I remember, make sure to subscribe so we can see each other again, and I'll give you some more valuable information. Now, when the settlor transfers assets into an irrevocable trust, they transfer ownership to the trustee. Still, the trustee cannot do whatever they want with the assets. Many states and offshore jurisdictions have very strict rules limiting the trustee's powers. They prevent trustees from conflicts of interest, and ultimately the trustee cannot inadvertently use trust assets for their own benefit unless the trust conditions allow it. Common benefits of an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable trusts have many advantages for those looking for a good asset protection and estate planning tool. They include the following: protecting assets from judgment creditors. In fact, I work hard for my money, and if somebody wants to take it from me, I'm going to make sure that they are going to work a lot harder. Removing taxable assets from the estate so the grantor can take advantage of estate tax exemptions. And this is a way to give a whole lot more to loved ones. Allowing appreciating assets to gain value without severe tax implications for the beneficiaries. Gifting a home to children with fewer tax implications so more money stays in the family. Gifting assets while being able to retain income generated from them. Hey, the government already taxed this money. Don't let them take any more than they legally can. Preventing misuse by beneficiaries via grantor wishes. It's easy to spend somebody else's money that you inherit. So your trust can pay for college and, let's say, require a bachelor's degree, master's or doctorate degree before they can get any more money out of the trust. Now, at that point, you can have the trust give them a lump sum or pay them a monthly income. Now, here are some typical uses for irrevocable trusts. Here are just a few of the ways that you can use an irrevocable trust to improve your financial situation. Asset protection. Irrevocable trusts, when properly drafted and established in the right jurisdiction and managed by an independent third-party trustee, are exceptionally effective tools for protecting assets from judgments and creditors. These trusts create a complete legal separation between the settlor and their assets. So if a settlor with a well-structured irrevocable trust loses a trial and is ordered to pay the plaintiff, the trust's assets remain shielded from legal claims. This protection becomes even stronger with offshore trusts like we talked about a little bit ago. In such cases, U.S. courts lack the authority to compel a trustee company in a foreign country to release trust assets, adding an additional huge layer of security. Estate planning. Many people use irrevocable trusts to pass along assets after their death. Now, here's a typical scenario concerning using an irrevocable trust for estate planning purposes. So let's say a couple sets up an irrevocable trust. They make their children the beneficiaries. Now, when they pass, their children receive payments from the trust. Now, these payments can help them achieve financial security earlier in life. In addition, a trust can provide substantial flexibility regarding how assets are doled out after the settlor's death. The trust may be drafted so the beneficiary receives a single lump sum or a certain amount at set intervals, say monthly or quarterly. You can even set up your trust to cover certain expenses, like we said, housing, education, and wedding costs, and exclude more frivolous expenses. In addition, a trust is often better than standard gifts from a tax standpoint. When assets are passed along via a trust, it can help reduce tax obligations, charity, and tax benefits. Irrevocable trusts offer several tax benefits primarily by removing assets from a grantor's taxable estate. Thus, it can reduce estate taxes upon the grantor's death. Income generated by trust assets may be taxed differently depending on the type of trust and how the income is distributed. For irrevocable trusts, income distributed to the beneficiaries is typically taxed at the beneficiary's individual tax rates, which can sometimes be lower than the trust tax rates. Additionally, irrevocable trusts established for charitable purposes can offer significant tax benefits. Contributions to a properly structured charitable trust may qualify for a tax deduction in the year the assets are transferred, subject to certain IRS rules and limitations. And by transferring assets into an irrevocable trust, the grantor removes their assets from the taxable estate, potentially avoiding capital gains on future appreciation if the assets are sold by the trust. However, the trust itself may still owe taxes on income it retains, such as interest, dividends, or capital gains, which are generally taxed at compressed tax rates anyway. Now here's the key thing. Proper planning is essential to maximize these tax benefits while complying with U.S. tax laws. Life insurance. Here's another one. One can even place life insurance policies into a trust. And here's what happens. An irrevocable life insurance trust, or ILIT, can hold and control a term or permanent life insurance policy, and then it distributes the proceeds when the insured dies. And then upon the policyholder's death, the ILIT is excluded from the insured's estate. Therefore, beneficiaries can increase the amount of money they receive without paying estate taxes. In addition, the life insurance trust can also pay the decedent's taxes, debts, and expenses. That is, the person who died, it can pay those things for them. And here's another thing. It can also help ensure the receipt of government benefits like Social Security or Medicaid, since the trust assets are separated from those of the beneficiary. In the same vein, the ILIT, the Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, can protect insurance proceeds from lawsuits against the trust beneficiary. The Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust can also help avoid the generation skipping tax, the GST. And this enables you to give proceeds to grandchildren and others without having to pay the 40% tax on distribution to those more than one generation removed. So let's talk about revocable versus irrevocable, and this is the question that we get a lot. A revocable trust, commonly called a revocable living trust, is an estate planning tool generally that a settlor can change from revocable to irrevocable later if they want to. So if your needs change, you can make amendments freely without third-party interaction. So that being said, why doesn't everybody just set up a revocable trust instead of an irrevocable one? There are several reasons, many of them we just talked about. A revocable living trust is part of your own estate for asset protection purposes, and as such, it offers no asset protection from creditors or those who seek to sue you. Number two, it offers no segregation of assets, so this can push your wealth levels above the maximum required to qualify for government benefits such as Medicaid or disability assistance. Number three, upon your death, assets in the trust are yours for estate and federal tax purposes. Okay, so here's why irrevocable trusts work best for asset protection. Now, the primary reason people use irrevocable trusts is to protect assets from lawsuits. So here's how it works. Legal theory commonly allows a creditor to step into the shoes of the debtor. In practice, this means that whatever the debtor could theoretically do to pay the creditor off, the creditor could force them to do so. For example, let's say the settlor of a trust could freely change the beneficiary. So in this case, the one who sued the settlor could step into the settlor's shoes and change the beneficiary to himself. In the same vein, if the trust allowed the settlor to independently spend trust assets on himself, the creditor could step into his shoes and do the same and pay themselves. A second asset protection benefit of irrevocable trusts is how they allow settlors to list out trust usage conditions. This ensures that the assets will not be used irresponsibly or in a manner that goes against the settlor's wishes, even after their death. So this is common in second marriages where a spouse wants to ensure their children from the first marriage receive at least a portion of the assets. And finally, irrevocable trusts contain a spendthrift clause. These clauses keep the assets in a trust separate from the beneficiary and the settlor. So this ensures that the beneficiary's creditors cannot seize trust assets until they're completely distributed to the beneficiary through previously established channels. Now here's a big deal, and I really want you to pay attention to this. Irrevocable trusts are not necessarily unchangeable. One of the biggest concerns cited about irrevocable trust is not being able to make changes. However, that concern is often overblown. There are ways to make changes to the trusts, and most can be made without reducing your asset protection abilities. So here are a few ways that irrevocable trusts can be changed without impacting their usefulness. Changing the trustee of an irrevocable trust. Don't like the trustee? That's okay. Simply fire them and hire another. Want to retain your asset protection? Here's how. You can change the trustee to anybody but yourself, a family member, an agent of yours, or a controlled employee. And this is because the court considers these people your alter ego. There are plenty of licensed bonded trustee companies with long-standing good reputations of responsible management. Okay, allowances for the unforeseen. Properly drafted trusts allow for a wide range of future possibilities. So certain circumstances may allow for a change of the beneficiaries or trustees. For example, if one beneficiary tragically passes or develops an issue that drastically alters their behavior, such as drug use, the agreement can be altered. A well-drafted trust addresses all of these circumstances. So let's learn more about the advantages and disadvantages of irrevocable trusts. So what works better, a domestic irrevocable trust versus an offshore irrevocable trust? Choosing between a revocable and irrevocable trust isn't the only decision to make when setting up your asset protection strategy. You also need to decide whether your trust will be based in the United States or offshore. So here's a quick breakdown of domestic and offshore irrevocable trusts. Okay, let's talk about domestic trusts for asset protection. A domestic asset protection trust is an acceptable choice for people looking to maintain moderate asset protection benefits without relying on foreign trustees. Those trusts are not as reliable as offshore trusts, however. Even the strongest domestic asset protection trust states are beholden to other states under Title IV of the Constitution. Additionally, the trust protection afforded by the U.S. laws are not nearly as powerful as many offshore jurisdictions. And that being said, placing your assets in an irrevocable domestic asset protection trust still makes it harder for creditors to reach your assets than no protection at all. Additionally, these trusts might provide several tax benefits and are well suited for estate planning. So as of this video, several states offer irrevocable asset protection trusts, and these include, let's see if we can do this in auction style, Alaska, Delaware, Hawaii, Nevada, New Hampshire, Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So how's that? Okay, now offshore asset protection. Offshore irrevocable trusts, commonly called offshore asset protection trusts, take asset protection to the next level. With trusts in the Cook Islands near New Zealand, Nevis in the Caribbean, or Belize in Central America, you can be the settlor and the beneficiary and still receive asset protection. In fact, our organization has set up more Cook Islands trusts than any firm in the world, and we've set up many trusts in all three jurisdictions. These jurisdictions have special laws so that you can still maintain some control over the trust in cooperation with a licensed, bonded trustee. So the greatest advantage of an irrevocable offshore asset protection trust is the trustee residing in a foreign jurisdiction, or the law firm / trustee company residing offshore, because they're not obligated to comply with U.S. court judgments. A U.S. court says, give me the money, and our offshore trustee law firm says, hey, you don't have jurisdiction down here. When presented with a U.S. court order, these trustees are legally and ethically bound to reject it, as compliance would undermine their duty to protect your assets. For a creditor to access assets in an offshore irrevocable trust, they must successfully prove to a foreign court that a fraudulent conveyance occurred. And this must be within the strict time limit set by your jurisdiction's laws. Leading offshore trust jurisdictions, known for their robust asset protection statutes, make such legal challenges extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. Okay, now here's a shameless plug. Establish an effective irrevocable trust with the help of Asset Protection Planners, my company. If you need more protection for your assets, a proper irrevocable trust is often the way to go. However, these trusts only work effectively if they're drafted by an experienced asset protection professional. And luckily, you're watching this video. So feel free to visit assetprotectionplanners.com. You can get a whole lot more free information there, where we've set up effective domestic and offshore irrevocable trusts for decades. We'll help you design a trust that meets your needs and keeps your wealth out of the hands of creditors and plaintiffs. I've been doing this for 34 years. So you can get the protection that you need. You can contact us today for a consultation. Fill out a free consultation form on our website and subscribe to this channel for more. We'll see you next time. This is The Business Guy.